situation to deal with where you have this victim who could, report you, or you could get in trouble. So therefore, the killing is necessary simply to perpetuate the ability to perform these.
What does evil look like? Not in horror movies, not in fiction, not in the exaggerated face of a monster. I'm talking about real evil, the kind that walks past you in a grocery store, the kind that volunteers at a hotline, the kind that shakes hands with politicians, hosts backyard barbecues, smiles for photographs, and then goes home to bury bodies beneath the floorboards. For decades, America has been forced to confront a chilling truth. Some of the most terrifying killers didn't hide in the shadows. They blended in. They looked ordinary. They sounded reasonable. They convinced neighbors, coworkers, even juries that they were misunderstood. And yet, behind closed doors, they hunted. This is not just a story about murder. It's a story about power, about manipulation, about the psychology of control, and about the ultimate consequence the American justice system reserves for the worst of the worst. From charming predators to suburban monsters, from highway hunters to sniper duos who turned a nation into a battlefield, these are the faces that stared back from death row before the lights went out for good. He wasn't sweating when they strapped him down. That's what unsettled people the most. Not the crimes, not the body count, not even the years of manipulation. It was the composure. By the time Ted Bundy sat in Florida's electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, he had become something beyond a murderer in the public imagination. He was a phenomenon, a headline machine, a symbol of something America didn't want to admit. Evil could be charming. And that myth didn't start in the courtroom. It started long before. In the early 1970s, young women began disappearing across Washington state. College campuses, dorm rooms, apartments. There was no forced entry in some cases. No loud struggle, just absence, then skull fragments, then scattered remains discovered months later in wooded areas. Police departments across multiple states were operating in silos back then. No centralized databases, no instant data sharing. A predator could move from Washington to Utah to Colorado and leave investigators unaware they were chasing the same man. Bundy understood that fragmentation, even if instinctively. He exploited geography. He exploited trust. He exploited hesitation. At Lake Sammamish, witnesses later recalled a clean-cut man introducing himself as Ted. He wore a sling or fake cast and asked for help loading a sailboat onto his tan Volkswagen Beetle. It was broad daylight. Families were everywhere. Teenagers sunbathing, music playing. 2 women walked away with him that day. Neither came back. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Dozens of people interacted with him and felt nothing alarming. That's the recalibration Bundy forced upon American culture. Before him, the popular imagination leaned toward the visibly deranged outsider. After him, suspicion shifted. The serial killer could be educated, politically engaged, polite. He volunteered at a suicide hotline in Seattle. Let that sit for a moment. A man secretly murdering young women by night was simultaneously talking strangers out of ending their own lives. Power for him wasn't only about death. It was about control over life itself, whether preserving it or extinguishing it. Psychologists later described this as a dominance-driven pathology. Not rage, not spontaneous madness, a need to orchestrate outcomes, to decide who continues and who doesn't. And the escalation was methodical. His first known victim, Linda Ann Healy, vanished from her basement apartment in 1974. Bundy struck her unconscious, dressed her body, wrapped her in a sheet, and carried her out. Her skull would later be found in a remote area. After that, the tempo increased. Oregon, Utah, Colorado. Women abducted near campuses, bludgeoned, strangled. Some returned to necrophilic rituals after death. A detail investigators later confirmed, further dismantling the narrative that killing was merely necessary to avoid detection. Violence wasn't collateral, it was central. He was eventually arrested in Utah in 1975 after a traffic stop revealed burglary tools and suspicious behavior. Convicted of kidnapping, sentenced to prison, and then he escaped. Not once, twice. The first escape came from a courthouse library window in Colorado. He dropped down to freedom and hid in the mountains for days before being recaptured. The second time was more audacious. He lost weight, sawed through the ceiling of his cell, crawled into the apartment of the jailer, changed clothes, and walked out the front door during the Christmas holiday season. That escape led him to Florida, and Florida would witness his most chaotic violence. In January 1978, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Within minutes, he bludgeoned and strangled 2 young women and attacked 2 others who survived. The frenzy was less calculated than earlier crimes, less controlled, almost desperate. It revealed something important. The myth of the evil genius was overstated. Yes, Bundy was manipulative. Yes, he was bold, but he also benefited from investigative gaps and sheer luck. He left bite marks. Eyewitnesses saw him. He committed crimes in heavily populated areas. He wasn't an omniscient mastermind. He was reckless, and often fortunate. His final known victim, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, was abducted from her Florida middle school. When her body was discovered weeks later, public tolerance evaporated. Whatever mystique remained collapsed. He was captured shortly after in Pensacola during a routine traffic stop. This time, the walls closed in for good. His trial in Florida became a national spectacle. Cameras broadcast proceedings into American living rooms. Women wrote him fan letters. Some believed in his innocence. Others were drawn to the notoriety. It was the early blueprint of criminal celebrity culture. Bundy even married a woman in court during the penalty phase by exploiting a Florida legal technicality that recognized declarations of marriage before a judge. Always performing, always maneuvering. Prosecutors offered him a plea deal before the death sentence, life imprisonment in exchange for a full confession. He refused. Admitting guilt publicly meant surrendering the narrative. He gambled on acquittal or reversal. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Death. Over the next decade, Bundy used confession as leverage. When execution dates approached, he would reveal additional murder details, but rarely enough to provide full closure to families. Just enough to delay the inevitable. Each postponement extended his relevance. But on January 24, 1989, the appeals ended. Outside Florida State Prison, a crowd gathered before dawn. Some held signs, some cheered. Vendors sold t-shirts. It was macabre, almost carnival-like. Inside, Bundy declined a final elaborate meal. He was strapped into the electric chair. At 7:16 a.m., the current surged. The man who had manipulated so many outcomes lost control of the final one. His execution marked more than the end of a life. It marked the end of an illusion, that intelligence equals sophistication, that charm equals depth, that monsters announce themselves. Bundy forced America to confront a psychological reality. Evil can wear a friendly face, and he would not be the last to prove it. If Ted Bundy shattered the illusion that monsters look monstrous, the next man destroyed the belief that they need to roam far from home. Because some killers don't hunt across states, they build graves beneath their own feet. His name was John Wayne Gacy, and for years, he lived the American dream. A house in the suburbs of Des Plaines, Illinois, a construction business, a wife, children, community barbecues, political connections. He even had his photograph taken with First Lady Rosalind Carter. He was active in local Democratic politics, respected, social, reliable. He also dressed as a clown. At charity events and children's parties, he became Pogo the Clown, painting on a smile that parents trusted and children laughed at. Under that grease paint, however, was a man who had already crossed lines long before murder entered the picture. Gacy's early life carried familiar warning signs: an abusive, domineering father who belittled him, questioned his masculinity, and left emotional damage that festered. As a young adult, Gacy struggled with his sexuality while attempting to maintain a public identity as a heterosexual family man. He married twice. He had children. He cultivated the image of stability. But behind closed doors, control was everything. In 1968, he was convicted in Iowa for sexually assaulting teenage boys. He served time, he was paroled, and incredibly, he rebuilt his life back in Illinois. That's where the real horror began. Unlike Bundy, who traveled and exploited jurisdictional gaps, Gacy hunted locally. He targeted young men and teenage boys, many of them runaways, vulnerable youth, or employees in his construction company. Criminologists sometimes refer to such victims as the less dead, individuals society tragically overlooks more easily. Gacy understood vulnerability. He lured victims with offers of work, alcohol, drugs, parties, sometimes just conversation. And then came what he chillingly referred to as the handcuff trick. He would demonstrate a supposedly clever escape trick with a pair of handcuffs, snapping them on his own wrists, slipping free, inviting the young man to try it. But when the cuffs clicked shut around his victim, they wouldn't open. Control achieved. What followed was prolonged torture, sexual assault, strangulation, and then disposal. At first, Gacy buried bodies in the crawl space beneath his suburban home. He poured lime over them in an attempt to mask decomposition. Eventually, when space ran out, He dumped additional victims into the Des Plaines River. For years, neighbors noticed nothing beyond a faint odor they dismissed as plumbing issues. That's how close evil can sit, separated from normalcy by drywall and denial. The turning point came in 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Peast disappeared after telling his mother he was meeting a contractor about a job opportunity. That contractor was Gacy. Police investigated. They searched his home. In the crawlspace, they uncovered a nightmare. Human remains buried beneath the house. Ultimately, 33 victims were linked to him. 33 young lives extinguished in a quiet suburban home. During his trial in 1980, Gacy's defense attempted an insanity plea, arguing that alternate personalities committed the crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty on all counts. Death sentence. He would spend 14 years on death row at Menard Correctional Center in Illinois. And here's where the cultural distortion deepened. While awaiting execution, Gacy became a morbid celebrity. He received tens of thousands of letters, some from curious strangers, some from admirers, some from people drawn to notoriety like moths to flame. He painted self-portraits of himself as a clown. Those paintings, mediocre in artistic merit, later sold for thousands of dollars simply because of who created them. That says something unsettling about society's relationship with violence. We condemn it, we fear it, but we also consume it. Gacy filed countless appeals, studied law books, maintained an air of defiance. He claimed innocence, claimed conspiracy, claimed manipulation. Yet the evidence beneath his own house told a different story. On May 9, 1994, he was executed by lethal injection. Even in death, performance. But strip away the spectacle and what remains is simpler and darker. Gacy wasn't a criminal mastermind hiding in shadows across multiple states. He was a man who killed where he lived, who blended into civic life, who attended neighborhood gatherings and then descended into a crawl space filled with bodies. His case forced investigators to reconsider something critical. Serial killers don't always cross jurisdictions. Many operate within comfort zones, familiar territory, predictable routines, and perhaps even more disturbingly, his crimes ignited a new wave of fascination. Books, documentaries, films, the serial killer as anti-hero. The larger the body count, the bigger the cultural footprint. That trend carries risk, because notoriety can become currency. When society elevates killers into household names while victims fade into footnotes, a dangerous message circulates. Attention is attainable through atrocity. Criminal psychologists have long observed that many serial offenders experience profound feelings of inadequacy or powerlessness. Violence becomes a distorted mechanism to reclaim dominance. In Gacy's case, the victims were often physically smaller, socially marginalized, easier to overpower. Control was the drug. Murder was the delivery system. And yet, for all the mythology that sometimes surrounds these men, their motivations are rarely complex in a cinematic sense. They are rooted in entitlement, in resentment, in a pathological need to command another human being's fate. No grand ideology, no revolutionary message, just domination. Gacy's execution did not erase the horror of what happened in that house. It did, however, close a chapter in an era when America was beginning to understand the scale of serial violence emerging in the late 20th century. Bundy shattered the image of the monster. Gacy shattered the illusion of distance. And still, the highways would soon reveal another pattern. Bodies discarded along asphalt corridors, stretching for miles. Because some killers don't bury their victims at home. They leave them on the roadside. If Bundy revealed how charm can conceal brutality, and Gacy proved horror can live under your own roof, the next wave of killers turned something even more ordinary into a hunting ground. The highway. Endless asphalt, gas stations, rest stops, exit ramps. Places where strangers cross paths for seconds and then disappear forever. One of the most notorious among them was Eileen Wuornos. She defied expectations. Eileen Wuornos wasn't the typical serial killer profile. She was a drifter and sex worker who claimed self-defense after killing 7 men along Florida highways between 1989 and 1990. Arrested in 1991, she confessed. She said the first victim, Richard Mallory, assaulted her, but the killings that followed showed a pattern: calculated robbery and execution. She later admitted she would do it again. The 2003 film Monster, starring Charlize Theron, portrayed her traumatic past. Yet trauma didn't absolve her. Sentenced to death, she was executed in Florida on October 9, 2002. She became, in death, a cultural figure. But Florida had already seen another predator tear through it years earlier. In 1990, the quiet college town of Gainesville transformed overnight. 5 students at the University of Florida were found brutally murdered inside their apartments. The killer posed bodies, mutilated them, created scenes designed to shock. His name was Danny Rolling, later dubbed the Gainesville Ripper. Unlike Warnos, who killed in transient roadside encounters, Rolling invaded private spaces, bedrooms, living rooms, safe places. He murdered Christina Powell, Sonia Larson, Krista Hoy, Tracy Paulas, and Manuel Taboda. When arrested for burglary weeks later, he confessed. He said he wanted fame, to become a superstar criminal. Not revenge, not ideology, fame. That statement exposes something deeply uncomfortable. For some offenders, notoriety itself becomes motive. Rolling was executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006. On the University of Florida campus, however, the focus shifted intentionally. A memorial, bearing the names of the victims, stands as a counter-message. Remember the lives lost, not the killer who took them. And then came a case that paralyzed an entire region. In October 2002, residents of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia began hearing a phrase repeated on the news: Beltway snipers. Random people were being shot at gas stations, outside grocery stores, in parking lots. One bullet, from a distance, no warning. The killers were John Allen Muhammad and his teenage accomplice Lee Boyd Malvo. Over 23 days, they killed 10 people and wounded 3 others. What made their crimes uniquely terrifying was distance. No confrontation, no physical struggle. Victims collapsed mid-step, not even knowing where the shot came from. This wasn't about physical dominance, it was about terror. Muhammad, the older and dominant figure, allegedly envisioned extorting $10 million from authorities and using it to fund a broader campaign of violence. Messages left at scenes taunted police. "I am God," one note read. But gods don't get caught. Police traced the shootings to a blue Chevy Caprice. On October 24, 2002, officers found Muhammad and Malvo sleeping inside it at a rest stop in Maryland. The spree ended quietly. Muhammad was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on November 10, 2009. Malvo, a minor at the time, received life without parole. Their case highlighted something psychologists call folie à deux, a shared delusional system between 2 individuals, one dominant, one impressionable. A toxic feedback loop where violence becomes rationalized inside a closed worldview. And as media coverage intensified, so did the visibility of their faces. That pattern keeps repeating. We recoil from serial killers, yet we memorize their names. We debate their psychology. We watch dramatizations. We buy books. Meanwhile, victims often become statistics. So what do these cases, Bundy, Gacy, Warnos, Rolling, Muhammad, actually tell us? First, evil rarely announces itself. Second, control is a common thread. Whether through charm, confinement, distance, or ideology, each of these killers sought power over life. Third, notoriety can be oxygen. When killers become cultural icons, even as villains, attention becomes part of the reward structure. That doesn't mean reporting should stop, but perspective matters. The death penalty closed these individual chapters. Execution chambers went silent, appeals ended, cells emptied. But the deeper question lingers. Does execution deter? Does it deliver justice? Or does it simply mark the final page in stories we've already turned into spectacle? More than 40 serial killers remain incarcerated in the United States today, serving life sentences or awaiting final outcomes. The phenomenon did not vanish with Old Sparky or lethal injection protocols. What must change is where we place the spotlight, not on the theatrics of killers, but on the humanity of those they stole from the world. Because the true cost of these crimes isn't measured in headlines. It's measured in birthdays never celebrated, graduations never attended, parents who never stopped waiting. If this deep dive made you rethink what evil really looks like, let me ask you something. Do you believe the death penalty delivers justice in cases like these? Or does it risk turning killers into legends? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. And if you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who follows true crime,